A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Hello and welcome to a new episode of a Cricketing View podcast. Today's episode is slightly different from some of the recent ones. I have a very special guest today, and special in several senses. Warren Brennan is the founder and chief technology officer of BBG Sports. You may not have heard his name, but he's been a fixture in your cricket broadcasts for several decades now. He's the contributor to the Virtual Eye broadcasting system. He provides the HotSpot and real-time Sneeko or RTS system, which is currently in use and was been recently in use in Australia. And I'm very glad that he's agreed to come on to the podcast because I think listeners will benefit from his view of where technology is in broadcasting and how technology works as an umpiring assist aid, and those are two distinct roles for technology in cricket. And he provides a unique insight because he's actually a developer of Hotspot and RTS. So welcome, Warren. I'm very glad that we could finally do this.
Thank you.
So you've been involved with the broadcasting of sport and with technological aids to broadcasting sport for nearly 3 decades now. How did you get started?
Well, originally I came out of university as 24, 25-year-old.
Yeah.
And again, like a lot of us, sport was my passion as a kid. I predominantly played tennis and got to a pretty high level within Australia. And one day I was in at Melbourne Park having hit a tennis and bumped into somebody I knew, and they said, "What was I up to?" I told them I'd finished university, and I told them what I'd studied in, and they said, "Well, there's a job coming up here soon. Maybe put your hat in the ring." So that was back in '88. And I started there working at Tennis Australia, which is obviously the organisation that runs the Australian Open. And, I got into technology and had, a huge event to try and look after from a technology standpoint. And I was there for 13 years full time. And then around the late 90s, we had some opportunities. We actually took our speed gun that we used in tennis, and we tried to get into cricket, and that's how we started in cricket way back in 99, 2000.
What did you study in university?
Well, strangely enough, I studied business, and I majored in accounting. So my number side of things wasn't too wasn't too bad. I did go back and study computer science after that, but that was just a diploma type of course. But I think the thing that was really interesting for me was I wasn't a great student. I didn't study all that hard when I was at school, and I got through. I went to uni. I didn't study all that hard again, but I got through. But the thing that was interesting for me was once I started working, particularly in the tennis, the practical side, or that I had, took over completely. And next thing I was involved in setting up networks, writing software for scoring systems, running fiber optics to try and extend our network, hooking up to the internet with, in the middle 90s with my mates from IBM. So all of a sudden the practical side just took over for me, and I became creative. Whereas, that 7 or 8 years before that, finishing school and going through university, I just couldn't adapt to the theoretical side of what I was being taught. But as soon as I got into a working environment, particularly in something I loved like sport, it just took over. So I was very fortunate that I found something I really loved straight away, and it's really hasn't stopped even till this day. So and I think I had that great period at the Australian Open where we had this huge event. And just to give you one example, there was one, I think the first year I worked there, I was sitting underneath there, and I saw, and this wasn't the system that I designed, the original system, and I saw match point on the video screen. And I think it might have been Becker or somebody playing. And then all of a sudden I saw him walk past my office and the video screen's still on match point. And I'm thinking to myself, that's just not good enough. So it was about a 5-minute delay between someone pressing a button and someone seeing the information. So the second year I was there, we just basically threw that system out and started again. So, we got that system down to sub-second, so that as soon as the button was pressed on court, everybody got that information. Yeah. So, that's really at the core of what I've tried to do for such a long period of time. Get as much information as we can and distribute it as quickly as we can in real time. So the fans can see all the great data. Like so I would have said from about 90 till about 95, we had all this incredible information at the Australian Open. Okay, but it was just internal.
Yeah.
Okay? No one else could see it. And then IBM came along. We shunted all that information to IBM, and then it all went up on their website. So everybody throughout the entire world that logged on to the site could see the information, and that was always within 5 seconds on the web. So, that's really where everything I've done has grown out of that, starting point. So it's about getting that information as quickly as we could. Same with the speed gun. When we took that to Channel 9 back in the late 90s, they just wanted that information up as quickly as we could get it. And in fact, Kerry Packer, there was a famous day, I think, in the second test match down in Hobart when the first test match, we were only putting the speed up maybe once or twice an over. And he rang up. And the guy in front of me, who was the head of sport, took the phone call. And Kerry said, "Am I paying for that speed gun to go up every ball?" And the guy said, "Yes, Kerry, you are." And he goes, "Well, you better put it up every effing ball." So, that's sort of, again, that's another pivotal point where I thought, well, here's this information, we've got it. Let's just, give it to everyone as much as we can. So from that point onwards, he gave me a lot of confidence. He wanted stuff. He wanted new things every season. And, around the same time, I was fortunate to meet a guy by the name of Allan Plaskett, who was an English guy who actually invented the snickometer. And he came to Australia at the end of '99. He introduced the snicko in the UK in the middle of '99, and I met him late '99. So we struck up a friendship, and we basically talked about how we could improve his product and do it together. So we started on that probably early in 2000 after he'd done his first season. And strangely enough, his product was developed in an Excel spreadsheet.
Wow.
And he was pushing all sorts of buttons to activate macros and stuff like that. And again, it would take about 5 minutes for him to build a snicko. So, but he was the mathematical guy. He was the one that built the whole system from first principles. Did all the audio filtering. Put the video together. So he basically guided me through what I needed to do to take that to a modern programming language, which we were capable of doing. So I think that took 6 to 12 months, and by the start of the 2021 season in Australia, we had a much quicker, much better snickometer. So
you mean 2000, 2001?
2000, 2001, yes.
Yeah.
And then pretty much straight after that, we started to talk about how we could improve it. And effectively, the big issue, again, it all revolves around real time. We actually had to wait for the tapes guys to give us a replay. So we'd have to call to the camera 5 guy, who's the side-on guy, whoever was controlling that tape machine, and say, "Could you give us a replay of that?" So that might take 20, 30 seconds by the time that all that happened. And, then we'd go through that 2 or 3 minute process of Allan. We were quicker by that stage, but we couldn't do it as quickly as we liked. So the next stage after that was to actually look at all the cameras that we would require. And we actually had to start thinking about recording them. So that was a couple of year process figuring out, okay, we probably need 3 or 4 main cameras, and there was, 2 or 3 cables for each of those cameras. So we were recording up to about a dozen feeds in real time.
For each delivery?
For every single delivery, yes. And that was back in the days when standard digital was around. And then, blow me dead, the following year, they switched to HD. So all of a sudden, we were behind the 8 ball again because we had to upgrade the system. And that took a couple more years. So by that time, I was working on the idea of the HotSpot. I'd actually had the idea more for tennis than for cricket. And the early testing we did was very promising for tennis, leaving a perfect ball mark on the ground, which was very much like a clay court mark. If anyone's familiar with a clay court mark, it left exactly the same shape and whatever. But then when we actually came down to trying to figure out how we were going to do it for either or sport, it became obvious it was going to be easier for cricket. So that was around the middle 2000s, 2004, 2005. We did plenty of testing. We went through a different range of cameras. It became quite obvious to us that the standard camera, which you would probably call a uncooled camera, wasn't going to work for us. We needed the super duper sensitive cameras that are called cooled infrared. So all of a sudden we were right at the top end of the infrared cameras, and they were difficult to get. So there was a really big process of getting them in and out of countries. There were certain countries they wouldn't allow them to go to. So probably my most memorable story was I think it was the middle of 2005. It was just after an Ashes series in the UK. I went over to the UK and we were going to test a French camera and an American camera at Old Trafford. And we tested from one of the commentary boxes, pointing out the window, towards the pitch, and we tested for a couple of days. During that period, I had a knock on the door, and a guy that I thought was vaguely familiar said to me, he said, "Look, we hear you're testing today with some new technology." I said, "That's right." And the guy said, "Sir Bernard would like to come and talk to you about it." And I thought, well, I don't know who Sir Bernard is, but I'm more than happy to have a chat to him. I found out later that this guy was Sir Bernard Lovell, who was a famous British astronomer. And the large bank of telescopes outside of Manchester were named after him. So the Lovell telescopes. So Sir Bernard came and sat next to me, and we discussed the infrared technology, and he said he'd been involved with some of that type of technology post 1945. He was actually in his 90s when I spoke to him.
Wow.
And I didn't really understand at the time until I got back to the hotel and I Googled him, who it was. But to cut a long story short, there was one stage where he was sort of leaning over, and I actually thought he'd fallen asleep. And he said nothing for about 7 or 8 minutes. And then all of a sudden he turned around and looked at me and he said, "Son, I think you're onto something. Whatever you do, don't give up." And that was sort of the impetus for me to continue. And we obviously got some good testing done over those couple of days, and we ended up finding something that we felt could work. So from the middle of 2005, for probably another 12 months, we got the system working. All the little bits and pieces, fell into place. And
how is your experience in cricket different from your experience in tennis?
That's actually a pretty good question. When I was at the tennis, I pretty much could make the right decisions myself.
Yeah.
And Tennis Australia supported me on that. And like I said, we built a big network with a lot
Yeah.
of fibre optic that covered 25 tennis courts.
Yeah.
And we were really concentrated on building a real-time network, which we did. And
Yeah.
and the backbone of that network drove the tournament.
Yeah.
Everybody knew the scores, everybody knew what the practice, court scenario was, when people finished, when they had to go from, one area to the next. So we actually built that from ground up really, really well. And it still survives till today. So I'm very, pleased that that's the case, even though I'm not there. With cricket, I think that the difference was, as I sort of alluded to before, um, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Kerry Packer pretty much drove the game. He was the one that was sitting at home. He wanted a great broadcast. He wanted people to be entertained and engaged, not just by the play, but what field in between. And he just gave us great support. So I think that in a lot of ways the game's got a lot to thank for his input, because that drove the what we've done over that period. And I know Hawkeye came out in the early 2000s, and the broadcast was big in the UK, and they were supported over there. I know the same thing was happening for Virtual Eye in New Zealand around the same time. So I think it was a different pathway for the two different sports,
Yeah.
for different reasons. So
Yeah.
it's quite different, in fact.
When did you? What is your relationship with the virtual eye people? Because you're basically the viewers see Hotspot, RTS, and virtual eye as one
Yeah.
package.
Yeah, look, they're a very talented bunch of guys that have been together for a long period of time, based
Yeah.
in Dunedin, in New Zealand.
They got their start in golf and sailing, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah,
Because that was the big television
absolutely.
broadcast, market in New Zealand and
Yeah,
Australia at the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the sailing, they've just finished in Auckland in the last week or so with the
Yeah.
American Cup, and I think that's 25 plus years that they've been doing that.
Yeah.
So they're still involved in their original sport as well. So their background has been more in animation,
Yeah.
whereas mine's sort of been more in video and cameras.
Yeah.
So we've worked together, very closely over the last 10 to 12 years, and I think what we provide as a team in Australia is quite different to what's being provided elsewhere. Fox, who is the main host broadcaster for cricket in Australia, they're very again the two or three main people who are in charge of Fox Sports are ex Channel 9 people. So they bring with them the old Packer values of really wanting to entertain the viewer. So
And basically, I mean, I think this is a very important history of how all this came about, because there's this idea that Hotspot and RTS and Ultra Edge and Hawkeye and Virtual Eye, all of these came into umpiring because the umpires needed help. Whereas the reality is that, with someone like Packer involved, there was no way that that stuff was not going to be in the broadcast, and that every year new stuff was not going to be added to the broadcast. So basically the umpires were going to get shown up, and they really needed the help. And that's basically the impetus for it getting into, okay, we can use this machinery to help the umpires as well, right?
correct. I mean, back in those days, Cricket Australia and all the boards that we worked for, they really didn't have that many people on site.
Yeah.
So it was really the TV people that ran everything. I mean,
Yeah.
that's changed a lot nowadays.
Oh,
Um,
is it?
Yeah, that's changed a lot. There's a lot more host board people that are on site, and it's a more complicated scenario now with multiple broadcasters. DRS has obviously changed as well. You've got more umpires on site as well, so there's more of a logistics management issue that the host, board has to manage. But in the old days, everything came from the broadcaster, and like I said, one person in particular, and that was Kerry Packer, because he just had such an appetite for particularly cricket and sport in general. So he just loved everything about it.
Yeah.
And
I wonder to what extent. One of the questions I've had, and I've sort of had an answer to this, but not, is that in the early years, the ICC didn't really have any contractual relationship with the providers of the DRS technology. That was completely between the broadcaster and the vendor of the technology, right? And the ICC was just saying, okay, we want this and we want that and we want this third thing, and that was it. I mean, there was no. It wasn't really official, but since then it has become official, right? Now they have specifications which go into contracts and stuff like that. So they require certain minimum broadcasting machinery and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and in a lot of ways, we still don't have a contract with the ICC. Most of it goes through the television companies. And like you said, they have to provide minimum specs for certain things. So it's a little bit it's not ideal from my perspective, but history has a lot to do in regard to how things are done.
I want to get into some of the sort of the details of these three machineries basically.
Yep.
One is the heat signature, which is the HotSpot. The other is the sound signature, which is the not the ultra edge, the real-time sneakometer.
Yep.
And the third is ball tracking. And I know that you debuted something called the Comet during the 2018-19 Australian season.
That's right.
And that's a version of ball tracking, but that's not yet commercial, right? That is still sort of a beta of sorts. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like most of the things we've done, is it started out as an entertainment product.
Yeah.
So it's basically there to show, how the ball has travelled from the bowler to the batsman.
Yeah.
And like I said, my expertise is more in video.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And not in animation. So, I've been working hard to try and come up with a product that is more video based. Similarly with the HotSpot and the Snicko, they're both video based products. I think that the believability of video is much higher than animation. And I think that, over the last few years, I mean, the controversial point at the moment is still umpire's call. And that's probably not going to go away until, it can be guaranteed that the ball tracking is more accurate than what it is now.
Yeah.
So, there are certain things I probably can't talk about, but I mean, I think everybody is aware that because there is this margin of error in the ball tracking, that says the systems aren't perfectly accurate. So, my idea with the Comet is to put up a product that is more accurate, and basically you can see whether it's accurate, because if the balls aren't being cut out, very almost perfectly, that the tracking hasn't been done correctly. So we'll see where we get to on that over the next year or so, and we'll see we'll see whether or not people believe whether or not it is more accurate than the animations. But I still think there is room. There's definitely room for the ball tracking system to go to the next level.
I remember you. I think it was you. I remember reading a story. I think this was about 7 or 8, 9 years ago, uh, about HotSpot and the heat signature, and basically, I think you gave a very sort of specific explanation of where HotSpot does best and where it does less well.
Yeah,
And you said that the two areas which caused it trouble was if the sun was incident on the outside edge of the bat, or in a direction such that it was incident on the the relevant edge of the bat, and bat speed. Those were the two. But I don't want to get into I don't want to ask you to sort of uh, tell me anything that's proprietary or privileged.
yeah, no,
But
that's
it
fine.
the basic physics of it suggests to me that both of these are basically problems of information, which is that how what resolution of information you have in the video and what frame rate you have in the
Yeah,
video.
yeah,
And basically, if you have bigger computers and more powerful computers which can do in real time, which can process more information in real time, then this problem is probably going to be less acute as the computers get bigger. Is that?
yeah. I think the computer's probably not the main part of it. It's more the cameras themselves.
I
Um,
see.
the resolution of the infrared cameras is nowhere near the resolution that you could, even use
In
on
video.
on your mobile phone. Um,
I see.
you know,
So it's
um,
not 1080p or
no,
HD or anything.
no. Our newest cameras are 720p, and
Okay.
they're the ones we've had for 4 or 5 years. But yeah, most of the time the cameras that we started with were around 640 by 512.
Hmm.
So they were only around the standard, just below the standard SD,
Yeah.
standard digital. So yeah, that was an issue. In the infrared spectrum,
Yeah.
we're actually using mid-wave cameras.
Okay.
Um, there are long-wave cameras as well. They tend to have more contrast.
Yeah.
They get less solar flare,
Yeah.
which would be good, but they're also a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So we don't actually use long wave. We use mid wave, which
Yeah.
has more energy in the mid wave,
Yeah.
but it's also subject to a lot more solar flare. So that's where you find that if the sun is in the wrong position, you will get a solar flare, potentially around the bat, particularly when it's shining in the sun. So, but that doesn't last for more than a frame or two.
Yeah.
But if it happens to happen as the ball's going past the bat,
Yeah. There's a
it's
small probability that it will, right? I mean,
correct, yeah. And then, as you mentioned, the faster the bat, uh, the player is swinging the bat, the more
yeah.
difficult it is to pick up, a very faint, small hotspot. So,
Yeah.
what we discovered pretty quickly was hotspot was better on, overall, it was better on the spinners,
Yeah.
primarily because as the ball is spinning and
Yeah.
it goes past the bat, it's going to grip a
Yeah.
lot more. Okay. And when it grips, it'll turn and grip and rub across the bat. And that's exactly what we need to make the best hotspots. Okay.
Yes. I
Whereas
see.
a ball coming from Glen McGrath at 135 kilometres, it may not even be turning.
Yeah.
It all that much. It might, seam up. It might just go all the way down the pitch, hit the
Yes.
bat, very slightly, and hardly leave an infrared mark at all. So it's more difficult on the faster bowlers, and generally more difficult on the outside edges.
Yeah.
We seem to have had a lot more success on the inside edges of fast bowlers, but I think that's probably because most of the time inside edges occur because the player hits the ball a little bit late and the
Yes.
bat might be angled a little bit more, and then you get more of the rubbing effect, which
Yeah.
produces a much better heat signature. So I guess after probably probably only a couple of years of doing HotSpot, we realised we had to try and go to the next level, and move up. We improved the cameras. We had a higher frame rate. We got over 100 frames a second on the second generation of cameras, which improved. We had better sensitivity, and then lo and behold, it still didn't fix the outside edges on the fast bowlers. We probably still missed 2 or 3 out of 10. So that was the time that Allan Plaskett and myself said, okay, we've got to turn the snickometer into the real-time snickometer. So we decided to, put our resources together and build the next system where we recorded, over a dozen camera feeds at once. And we built it into a real-time system, because what we found with the snickometer was, compared to the HotSpot, they complemented one another fantastically well. And the most interesting part was, like I said, where HotSpot was a bit weak on the outside edges on fast bowlers, that's where Snicko was best. Because on those types of deliveries, there's pretty much, and if they're swinging outside, off stump, it's more often than not, then they've got their bat nowhere near their pad. So and they've got their bat nowhere near the ground. So it really can't be anything but bat on ball. So that helped elevate our accuracy in regard to outside edges on fast bowlers. But conversely, what we found was that the Snicko was much weaker on slow bowlers.
I see.
Okay. And the thing about that was, to start with, we found that, obviously, as a lot of people know, you don't actually know where the noises come from. Okay.
Correct.
There could be movement of the keeper behind the stumps, just as the ball's going past the bat. So what we found with the Snicko, with the slow bowlers, was if there's two noises, then it becomes quite problematic. Okay, because if the keeper is moving his feet and he's a metre behind the stump mic, as the batsman hits the ball a metre in front of the stump mic, and gets a faint edge, then those noises from the keeper and from the bat will arrive at the stump mic at the same time. So there'll be this overlaying of noises. So here is the maybe the spike from the bat on ball, and here's the noise from the shoes of the keeper, and they'll overlay one another, and it's very difficult to tell which is which.
Yes, that's something I've often wondered about, because unlike the hotspot and the heat signature, the sound signature, one of the things it depends on is how far away from the microphone the contact actually occurs. And I always think that, especially when a spinner is bowling, the wicketkeeper is standing right up against the stumps. And when the batsman is stretching forward and playing forward, and then the ball catches one of the edges, or, catches the glove or something, then the glove is further away from the stumps than the wicketkeeper's spikes.
Correct.
And the wicketkeeper is never standing still. No. The wicketkeeper is always, he's taking a step, or he's doing something, right? Or he's even punching his gloves together, or, bringing his gloves together, bringing his gloves apart. And, one of the things that, some of my friends who are sort of, nowadays everyone is an expert in neural networks, and they say, oh, well, you can take these signatures and you can build a classification model which tells you, oh, this signature means it's very likely to be from the bat. This signature means it's very likely to be from the glove. This means it's from the pad, and this means it's from the pocket. But I've done a little bit of work with neural networks, and I think it's not that simple. I think it's a little more involved than that, and there's no reason to automatically think that just because you decide that you can classify something that you'll be able to classify it. And as I understand it, there's no signature system, right? The RTS is only, identifying a sound. It is not
That's right.
identifying sound from bat, or it is not classifying a source for the sound.
No. Well, I mean, we can pretty much tell.
Yeah.
When the ball comes off the glove,
Yeah.
you'll get a much smaller spike,
Yeah.
and generally a bit wider. So it'll be more of a thuddy type noise.
Yeah.
Whereas bat on ball, ball on bat, if it's come off the side of the bat, you'll get
Yeah.
much more of a spike.
Yes.
Whereas what we've also found is, particularly through T20 type style cricket, is when
Yeah.
they play those little paddle shots,
Yeah.
you almost get no noise at all,
Even if it's off the bat.
even if it's off the bat, because the angle that they paddle the ball on,
it's just
it
grazing the
glances.
bat.
It's grazing
Yeah.
it with a very small glance.
Yeah.
So in that instance, you virtually get no sound, audio signature at all. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that we found that using HotSpot and Snicko together is really the only way that we're comfortable trying to find the best decision. We did have one event, which was the 2015 World Cup in New Zealand and Australia, where we ran Snicko only.
Yeah.
And that was where we noticed where the real problems were.
Yeah.
Thankfully, since then, we've always run both.
Because I find that the system is it's a very sort of elegantly triangulated system, because on the one hand you have the heat signature, which is providing you one bit of evidence. The other time you have the sound signature, which is telling you the correct moment in time when the sound happens. And then you have the synchronized video, which tells you, which is mutually orthogonal. There's one from square leg and one from down the wicket and one from behind sometimes, or sometimes it's just two. But basically, between the three of them, you can pretty much deduce, firstly, the correct time frame in which the impact is possible, and then if impact is possible in that time frame, did the impact actually occur? So it is a I think I enjoy it because, and I think it's elegant because it's a protocol. It's a deductive protocol, right? It's a combination of evidence from which, if you're sort of trained and disciplined about it, you can invariably get a correct answer. Do you have like a manual for umpires where, because I know there have been cases where the umpire misses the synchronization part of it, but in recent years, all the umpires seem to have really figured out the whole synchronization information. Because I remember there used to be cases where, the front on camera will show the ball like just crossing the bat, and then there will be a spike, and the side on camera will show that, well, the ball has not yet reached the bat.
Yeah.
And
it's a very important point you make there, because there's a couple of things that are really paramount with the system, and the first thing is that the synchronization of the cameras has to be absolute. And that's the most important thing. So all of the cameras have to be perfectly synchronized. And, to be honest, that took a couple of years to get that, because we were recording, a huge amount of data coming into our PC. Never been done before, as far as I'm aware, in any sport. And this was, back in the middle 2000s when we started this process. And you've got to keep everything in synchronization, because you need those multiple angles all to be at the exact same time. So as far as the audio is concerned, we came up with the use of the old-fashioned Hollywood clapperboard, where you basically have an open clapperboard and you close it, and that's how we calibrate the system. So we go out in the mornings, we use the clapperboard on the popping crease, and basically we slam the clapperboard closed, and it obviously makes a noise when it closes, and we use that point as our calibration point. and effectively we come up with a video audio offset. Now, I think most people would be familiar with lightning and thunder,
Yes.
Conundrum, whereby if the clouds are a long way away from where you are, you will see the lightning straight away, and several seconds later you might hear the thunder.
Okay.
And it's not until those clouds get right above your house or wherever you are that the two of them might be very close together. So the other part of the system that's very, very important is to come up with this, video and audio offset that must remain constant throughout the day. So one of the real big things that we constantly do every ball, our snickometer operator winds back every ball, and when there's bat on ball, we check the synchronization. And the key to our system, which is different from Ultra Edge, is that we calibrate it because of the lightning and thunder scenario. We calibrate the system so that the noise or the spike in the graph will not show until the ball is clearly past the bat.
I see.
Okay, because the sound can't appear before the bat. It's just not possible. Okay, so our calibration setup is the noise has to be one frame past the ball going past the bat. Okay,
that makes sense.
And that is what we've told the ICC, and they've told their umpires. And for most of the time, they get that right. But I think when they're using Ultra Edge in other parts of the world, and then they come and use Snicko in this part of the world, then sometimes they get a bit confused. But
and in the ICC, there's also there are some umpires who've umpired maybe 20, 25 test matches as a TV umpire. And especially this season, we saw with because of the COVID system, you had home umpires. And in so many cases, the home umpires, it's maybe the first or second test that they're doing with DRS as a TV umpire. And I guess it must take some experience to get everything, to master all these details. So which is why I was wondering, does the ICC have? They ask the broadcaster or you guys as part of the broadcaster to provide tutorial or something like that for the umpires or something?
We've given a lot of documentation to the ICC over the last several years. And we've been invited to their yearly conferences on a couple of occasions. And I meet with one of the head umpire coaches here in Melbourne regularly. So we go through those things quite a lot. But to be honest, I would really like the third umpire to be sitting down in the OB compound, sitting between sitting between the HotSpot and the Snicko person, watching 600 balls a day. And that would be by far the best way for them to be very, very proficient in both systems. But unfortunately, I haven't had much luck over the years getting that to happen. They believe that it's more important for them to be generally upstairs looking over the ground and doing their other tasks from up there. But from my perspective, I think it would be far better for decision making if they were sitting downstairs in the TV compound, watching the Snicko and the HotSpot every ball, because then they would be able to be very proficient in looking at heat signatures, looking at spikes, and being 100% certain of what they're doing. So maybe one day if we ever get specialist third umpires that are more television trained, then maybe that might be the case. But at the moment, that doesn't happen.
So I think this is useful for listeners to understand that I think it's particularly useful for listeners to realize that the way you read Ultra Edge and the way you read our RTS is a little bit different. That the interpretation of what you see on the television has to be different because they're giving you different information.
Yeah.
And that's something I think it's you know one of the things that's happening is, and this is an old idea, the idea of alienation, where, the machinery is so, obscure and distant and advanced, and what you're watching, you're just looking at, a beautiful animation. And this is especially acutely the case with ball tracking. That, you have no, as a viewer, who may not be sort of interested in computer vision or, infrared technology or something like that. It's completely foreign to you. You have no way into sort of understanding it. It's an alien thing for you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very nice thing if users and listeners and viewers can sort of, at least when the next time they watch something, at least they will have some idea of, okay, well, this is what I should look for.
Yeah.
Which brings me to ball tracking, which is an interesting engineering problem, to be honest.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you've been bringing forth is this question of real time. Because I can imagine lots of different ways of solving the ball tracking problem if given like 15, 20 minutes
Yeah.
to do the processing. You could do a lot of very sophisticated things and, get very good estimates, like absolutely precise estimates. But that would take time,
That's right.
And so ball tracking seems to me to have basically three, and I want you to correct me when I go wrong here, because, the technology is proprietary, but, it's not like it's magic. It's like it's still engineering, and you can see what they're doing, and you can still make out like, well, what are the possible options they have here? Like, what are the possible options an engineer would have if they were trying to solve this problem, right? And so the first problem in ball tracking is to locate the position of the ball in each frame, relative to a 3D frame of reference.
Yeah.
Right? And I can think of several ways to do this. This is basically a vision problem which involves some photogrammetry of some kind. The other is to sort of do an interpolation and reconstruct a path of the ball, because you have the frames are also time stamped, right? So you also have some idea of deceleration and things like that. And then you have two problems of estimation before you get to the prediction. One is to estimate the pitching point, because statistically it is possible that you don't actually have a frame where you can see the pitching point. You could have one frame just before and another frame just after, and you need to still locate the pinpoint, the XYZ point where it pitches. And the second problem is the much harder problem of impact, because there you have to find out where two things which may or may not be moving at the same time in different directions are colliding, which is the pad and the ball. And you need to be able to do that you need to pinpoint an XYZ position for that as well. And after that, once you have that path and once you have that interpolation, then it's a problem of extrapolation, which is okay, I have some idea about how you might do that. It seems to be basically a projectile motion problem, a physics problem, where, given, what speed the ball is traveling and what trajectory the ball is traveling and what are the next, 6 feet or 8 feet or 10 feet or whatever it is of its path, and you do some calculus and you find an integral, basically. So that's my sort of hand waving description of how a ball tracking system might be developed.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that from what I've seen, and like I said, I've only been doing ball tracking myself on the Comet for the last couple of seasons. The other couple of companies, Hawkeye and Virtual Eye, have done it for a lot longer.
Yeah.
But I've sat in the same room as both of those companies on many occasions operating. And, I've basically seen what they've done, and I think what you describe is, pretty much what they do. But just some of the things that
So
I've heard.
they used to do that for tennis as well. Did you have experience of this in your tennis days?
No, I left in 2000, and Hawkeye didn't start doing tennis until I think 2002, maybe 2003. So
Okay.
yeah, I didn't see it back in those days. There was another system, but that was a bit different. That was the one where the court caught on
They
fire.
used to beep. Yeah, it used to
Yeah,
beep,
that one as
right?
well. That was the original. And then the next one was the one that had all the magnetic fields under the lines, and that actually caught on fire one year on court 2 during the tournament. It was very embarrassing. But yeah, we digress. But there are interesting things that they have to overcome. I mean, even on some of the big, concrete stands here in Australia,
Yeah,
there's still a lot of stadium wobble.
yeah,
And
I can imagine.
the southern end at the MCG is terrible. It
Yeah,
wobbles like crazy. The northern end, which is a newer stadium, doesn't. So I'd imagine if it happens at that big stadium, it would happen anywhere. So they
yeah,
have to take into account the wobble of the stands, and they have to allow for that and calibrate for that. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing that I've noticed that's obviously lighting is a major thing uh,
yeah,
throughout the day, and it's generally only the middle of the day where you get even lighting across the whole ground.
yeah,
Uh, Once the sun goes to one side of the ground or the other, then you've got different lighting characteristics on both sides of the ground. We found that the white ball is generally much harder to track than the
yeah,
coloured ball. So that's another issue that causes some grief. But I think the thing that I've found is it's really about finding the centre of the ball,
yeah,
because the centre of the ball and the radius of the ball is what if you can find that, then I think your accuracy is going to be a lot higher. So. And that is really determined by the exposure time of the camera.
yeah,
If you've got too long an exposure time, you're going to get too much blur.
mm,
Whereas if you can reduce the blur, then you're going to get a much sharper ball. And if you get a
yeah,
sharper ball, you've got much more chance of actually finding a dead center.
yeah.
So I
I
think
see.
they're the important ingredients. And when you look at the Comet, you'll see that it's generally been cut out pretty accurately. You can see
Yeah,
the ball. You're not seeing half the ball or a quarter of the ball. It's the full ball. So we've gone to an enormous amount of trouble to try and find the dead set center of the ball and the radius. And the other thing that I think is really interesting that probably a lot of people don't know, and again, I've only noticed this from operating the Comet, during the Indian series over the summer here in Australia, is that I don't believe that the fast bowlers,
mm,
the ball doesn't dip on fast bowlers virtually at all.
mm,
Okay, so what the trajectory is from the ground to the pad
mm,
won't change from the pad to the stumps.
yeah,
Okay, because the ball's generally going over 120 kilometres an hour, and
yeah,
quite often faster than that. What we have seen is the spinners,
yeah,
and I've seen some from Nathan Lyon,
yeah,
where the ball does actually start to dip even before it gets to the pad.
yeah,
Okay, so I think the height issue for spinners is far more difficult to figure out than the
right,
fast bowlers. If you can accurately track the ball from the ground to the pad on a fast bowler, I don't think there's too many difficulties extrapolating it from there to the stumps. But for the spin bowlers, I think it's harder. It probably dips between half a ball
mm,
from from 1 to half a ball. So, yeah, there's much more dip on the spin bowlers, and that's not always the case. Depends what sort of spin bowl, they bowl, and what happens with the pitch, obviously.
And what speed they're bowling at,
Exactly.
because spin bowlers also come in a big range, from like the late 40s to the early 60s
Yeah.
in miles per hour. And
Yeah.
well, now that you mentioned this, and I was looking on your website about what you say about the Comet. It seems to me that ball tracking, the approach that they take in ball tracking, like Virtual Eye and Hawkeye, it's designed to work with cameras which may not produce enough frames of information. So one of the reasons, one of the ideas, one of the limitations of ball tracking is that if the distance between the pitching and impact is less than 40 centimeters, then they say, well, may not have enough information to make the extrapolation.
That's correct.
Because and my intuition is that that's because if 40 centimeters is too small to sometimes get enough frames to after pitching. Because basically the one intuition I have is that what happens before pitching and what happens after pitching are basically two separate events.
Correct.
Right. And all you can get from sort of the first part is some information about trajectory and speed.
Yeah.
Right. And not much else. But it's still, you might as well think of them as two separate things.
Yeah.
Right. But now you seem to have much faster, basically you seem to be able to capture way more information from a 2020 camera than you could from a 2005 camera. Because
you definitely can.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned before, the frame rate is really important.
Yeah.
But
the resolution.
a really high frame rate.
Yeah.
With too much exposure time is still going to give you a blurry ball.
Correct.
Okay. So it's a combination of both. It's a high frame rate and a low exposure time, or as the television people say, a lot of shutter. So you need those two, but the conundrum in trying to achieve that is that not all cameras are sensitive enough to actually have a low exposure time, okay, and a high frame rate, okay, and give you something that you can actually look at and even determine, particularly at night time. So that's the real thing that's important, to try and find a camera that will meet those qualifications.
Yeah.
And that's taken me a long time to find the right stuff, particularly for nighttime. So, but like you said, when the ball is very deep on the crease, and you might only get, like you said, 30 or 40 centimeters before it hits the pad, it's almost impossible to get a good trajectory.
And it's also why they seem to be, and this I've heard from multiple people, and over a decade I've been hearing this consistently, is that it's much surer about the line than it is about the height at the stumps.
Yeah.
It's less certain about the height at the stumps than it is. So basically, if you do a confidence interval, then it will be an ellipse with a major vertical axis.
Yeah.
Not a circle.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think unless you get the circle, how can you be really confident?
Yeah. But that's why you have umpire's call, and that's why they basically made. I think that's actually quite a. From a protocol point of view, and as a conservative choice, I think it's quite an elegant solution to say, okay, well, we'll just cut it off at the base of the stumps, and we'll give the bails to the system as an extra additional error, and we'll just say that, okay, well, that little boundary is umpire's call. I calculated it's about 6 centimeters in height and about 3.5 centimeters in width.
Yeah.
If you take a radius of a standard ball, which is an inch and 1.4 inches or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Look, I'm actually more concerned about the technology being accurate. I leave the actual technicalities of to the people that make the rules. I'm more interested in trying to find the most accurate way to build these systems.
Yeah.
That's really what I've been interested in, real time. The other thing that I think is very important in these systems is that they can't take too long to deliver their answer. I mean, we don't take very long on Snicko and HotSpot, and we're always up first.
Yeah.
Okay, and then generally ball tracking comes after us. Now, I believe that if you've got to wait more than 10 seconds after our HotSpot and Snicko for the LBW, then you've got some major issues.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what the fiddle factor is.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. I don't like it, but it's there. And
I mean, there are some really interesting engineering problems. Like, I find the whole problem of locating the frame of impact to be a really interesting, a really interesting problem to solve.
Well, in our case, what we do with Virtual Eye is they rely on HotSpot.
Yeah.
Because that tells you exactly where the ball's hit on the pad.
I see.
Okay, so we match that up with them.
I see.
But they always ask us, was it front pad, was it back pad? And we'll tell them. And sometimes we tell them it's both pads. So, that's how we tend to, get around that issue. But it's, video is a strange thing. You're trying to project a 3D solution into 2D, and it's the depth of the front-on cameras that can be very difficult to read properly, and that's why the split screen
is have the problem with the low catches.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, and I'm not sure if that's solvable at all. I mean, I still don't know after all of these years if a blade of grass gets bent by a finger, then what's the rule there?
Yeah. What is the guarantee that the ball never touches that blade of grass?
Exactly. If the blades of grass are poking through the fingers, what's the rule? No one's ever been able to answer that one.
Because this is where the whole question of judgment comes, and the whole question of interpretation comes. And I mean, I think one of the reasons I admire umpires so much, and one of the reasons I think umpiring is just flat out cool, is that umpires are extremely disciplined in the way they interpret things. Like, for the low catches, they have a heuristic, which is, if you've watched low catches over like the last 7 years since they created the whole soft signal system, you can make out that there's a pattern. Basically, if the decision on the field is that, okay, it's likely to be out, if that's the provisional signal, then if the video shows that the fielder has fingers below the ball, the umpires are unlikely to reverse it. They don't like to reverse that. But if there's a frame which shows that the fingers are not below the ball and that the ball is touching the ground clearly, then they reverse it. Now, they could change that heuristic. Like, they could say, okay, well, fingers are not enough. It has to be the palm which is under the ball, and it can't just be the fingers. That would be a safer heuristic given the requirements of Law 33. But that's not what they use. And I tend to think that that's fine as long as they are consistent in the way they apply this interpretation. That's the other side of DRS, which is that they take all the evidence that you guys produce and they create sort of these interpretation rules of thumb, if you will. Umpire's call is the most formalized one among these. Right? How much input do you guys have in the design of those rules?
I don't believe that there's much input from the technology suppliers. Basically, as I said to you in regard to Snicko, we have configured our system, calibrated it so that if there is bat on ball, the spike will show up in the frame when the ball goes past the bat. That's about as much input as we have, and we relay that to the ICC, and they, put it in their documentation for the umpires. So, that's what they have to look for. In regard to HotSpot, I think it's just a lot of practice and interpretation to look at, and my guys and myself, we can tell what's a real hotspot mark and what's not, what's a solar flare, and what isn't. So that's a hard one to, to get people to be really good at. So I think, it's just practice. It's sort of, I think the thing that was interesting is when some of the umpires have come into our area and sat down with us for, 2 or 3 sessions. I think they're quite amazed that we are going through the exact same process as they are on field. We're concentrating every ball. We've got to make sure the tech is working well, We've got to make sure that some kid hasn't walked by and knocked the hotspot camera or done something silly or kicked the power out or something like that. So we're under just the same sort of ball-to-ball pressure that they are. So once they realised that, I think they had more respect for what we were doing. And there's been a lot of good umpires that have come down afterwards after say a tough day out in the middle, and they've come down. They said, "Can you show us some of those decisions and can you work it through with us?" And we're always more than happy to do that. So but it's look, it's not an easy job. There are times when there's a really close decision, and it might take us 10 or 15 seconds to be, become clear on it. Whereas most of the time it'll only take a couple of seconds. Wind it back, look at it, know that okay, that's could be front pad before back pad, and then as soon as you see it, you tell the television director, not out, whatever. And most of the time it works very, very well. But some of the times, there's been some incredibly difficult ones over the last 10 years that you couldn't script.
In the concluding part of this, I wanted to ask you about the future. And I want to start by asking you about this thing I've been hearing about for a long time, which is this whole idea of technology to help umpires, which is not dependent on the broadcast. And the only real thing I can think of which has actually been implemented is the Zing bail, because that's not, and broadcasters don't seem to demand that all the time. In some series it's there, in some series it's not there, but whenever it's there, they use it for to judge runouts and stumpings. So do you, and the other is this thing which has only been in experiments. I think it's not really there's no protocol for using it, is the whole back sensor technology. But do you think it's feasible? Where do you see the future of that?
Well, my preference is for a passive solution, and it always has been. So I'm not an expert on, trying to do this stuff like some of the companies that have done it. But there's been the two solutions that I've been aware of. The one that had the sort of little chip on top of the bat handle, and that was Bluetooth enabled to the stump mic area. And then the bat sticker that was used in Australia a couple of seasons ago, that was similar, I think. That is basically Bluetooth. The interesting thing that I found from sitting in with the guys that were doing that was that someone like Dave Warner, you may remember, he takes off his gloves after every delivery, and he walks off to square leg. Now, he may only walk 5, 6, 10 meters and before coming back. But what I was hearing from the guys that were operating that system was that he was dropping off the Bluetooth every time he did that.
I see.
Okay? So it wasn't until he got back in his standing position that he may reconnect. Now, I don't know a lot about Bluetooth. I know that it is a low power system. So it probably, as soon as, something, it loses a little bit of signal, it might drop off. I don't know. But with a system like that, that won't cut the mustard. It just won't be reliable enough, I wouldn't imagine. So if they're going to put something on the bat, I would imagine it needs to be a lot more, robust than that. So
which means it probably means it needs to be bigger and heavier and
could
more
be,
invasive
yeah,
right now.
yeah. And
So it's not.
I don't know whether the players, getting it on all the players' bats, from what I've seen, it will be problematic.
Mm,
And then you probably need more logistics to make sure that occurs. And
mm,
then what happens. I know these things have to be charged just like a normal phone battery.
yeah.
What happens if one just runs out of battery, halfway through
Mm,
someone's innings, and you're
yeah.
getting nothing.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, it's not passive enough. It's not
Yeah.
controllable enough. But
Yeah.
good luck to somebody who can make it work. And if they can replace the Snicko and Ultra Edge with something like that, then I'll be the first person to congratulate them. So let's see how that goes. But to go back to your first question, I gather you're actually asking whether or not the ICC should be paying for the technology.
Well, yeah, and whether they should be commissioning customized technology to help their umpires, because right now it's all, they help the umpires to the extent that the umpires need help, so that they don't look foolish because of what the broadcast is showing, right? I mean they say that, well, we want to get decisions right and this and that, but I mean that didn't seem to move. They didn't seem to care about that enough to actually help the umpires. They started helping the umpires because their umpires were looking foolish, because there were 2 dozen video replays showing that what was given out as a bad pad catch was actually off the pad, like it missed the bag by 3 feet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Look,
I mean that.
I think it's again, it probably goes back to where this stuff started, and
Yeah.
that was with Kerry Packer. He
Yeah.
wanted an entertaining, really interesting broadcast, and
Yeah.
he was the one that gave me the confidence to get involved. And
Yeah.
I know the Hawkeye guys were around the same time. The Virtual Eye guys, love the, all the confidence that Channel 9 and now Fox have given them. So, the first question is, are you going to find broadcasters a consistent level of broadcaster around the world?
Yeah.
I think we all know the answer to that, and that's going to be no. So there's going to be some broadcasters that'll want the toys and want to make it ultra entertaining and up to date for the viewers. There'll be other places that simply can't afford it and won't want to do it. So, and that's where maybe the ICC needs to step in and do things. But I think that to date they haven't done that. And I think there'll be there'll probably always be a cloud over whether they really want to do that, and they'll just let the various broadcasters do what they want to do, to make the game more. I mean, the thing I've learned out of cricket is that it's really not a level playing field. So when you actually keep that in the back of your mind, the countries that can afford the technology may go for it. The countries that can't won't, and I think that's probably unlikely to change.
Yeah. Do you think? The sort of the allied revolution advance is the whole analytics data collection revolution, because now, and I think that's not going away anytime soon, because increasingly there are more and more franchises which have to make money decisions about which player to acquire, which player to not acquire, and so on. And so that's only going to grow. And if you look at what has happened in football, for instance, it's much more advanced and mature in football than it is in cricket.
Yeah.
And do you see an alliance with that side of things? Because you are basically providing ball by ball records, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned before, what we've had really a great deal of success with the Comet is cutting out the ball and showing the real flight path.
Yeah.
When you can get blur-free images in sports, in whether it's tennis, golf, different types of football, cricket, once you can get blur-free images, then the whole world of AI just opens up.
Yeah.
Because you can measure things when they're not blurry.
Yeah.
When they're blurry, you're just guessing.
Yeah.
So I think, our AI partner that we're working with is getting some unbelievable results from our video at the moment. So I think in the next couple of years, you'll see a whole range of statistics and interesting metrics that I don't think has ever been,
that would be something to look forward to, especially for me, because I like all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be very entertaining, and that's what, as you probably can tell, for me, it's about entertaining the fan and giving them the best information you possibly can. So that's what I think will be really exciting in the next couple of years.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Brennan. This has been a very great pleasure.
Thank you for taking so much interest in the sport.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye.